Hello everyone and welcome to our channel. In this episode, I will share my experience designing a process inside of Dynamics 365 for finance and supply chain management that includes franchising and co-op components. Before we proceed, I would like to share a list of the requirements that had to be fulfilled as the part of that process. Requirement number 1 includes an item A, which is a manufactured item. This is a component of a higher level assembly. This component, though, is sold to franchisees. The cost of goods manufactured stays internal with franchisor. Franchisees are invoiced for the item based on predetermined sales price. Anytime before invoicing, system should allow changing of that sales price. Requirement number 2 includes an item B, which is a manufactured item as well. Item B is using item A that was manufactured and sold to franchisees in a previous requirement. It also serves as a sub-assembly for a final assembly item C. The item B, though, is not sold separately to franchisees. Requirement number 3 includes manufactured item C, which is a finished good assembly. It is sold to franchisees. The cost of goods manufactured is marked up to determine a sales price invoiced to franchisees. The cost of goods manufactured, of course, should include the cost associated with sub-assembly production, which in our case is item B. After item C is sold to franchisees, it has to be brought back so it then can be sold to an end customer. The cost of goods sold for that sale should be 0, and the sales price is based on negotiated terms with end customer. Franchisees will receive a credit for this sale. And then final requirement number 5, we have franchisees that should receive monthly statements. Franchisees are charged for items that are sold to them, in our case item A and item C. At the same time, franchisees are getting credit for the sale of item C with a credit amount equals to sales price to an end user minus franchise fees. So this is an example of franchisee business model component that had to be integrated in this process. At the same time, all debit and credit amounts that are posted should be equally allocated to all participating franchisees. So this is an element of co-op business model. So what would be the best mechanism for us to implement all those business requirements? Because we have splitting of some debit and credit amounts, the logical first place for us to look at would be a project management and accounting module. So this is what we're going to do now. We're going to go into the system and run through a demo. What I will do here is navigate to the module, open the list of all the projects, and here I've already set up a project that we will use, project 288. This project has a project stage in process, which would allow us to post transactions to it, and it's also associated with a contract 208, which I will cover on later. So we have first item A that is being manufactured. In my demonstration, I will take an example of farm grow-up operations. We have 3 main items. Item A would be a seedling, which is basically a grown seed that is used in a production of the plant. Plant will be a next item that uses seedlings and some nutrients to create a plant itself. And once the plant is grown, it will be used in the production of packaged plant sellable good that would include a plant itself as well as some packaging. So what would be the best place for us to start? Well, we have to create a production order for a seedling item because this is a manufactured item. We will create a production order as the part of the project. So I will navigate to the Manage tab, click on New, and we'll select Production Order. I will then select my seedling item. I will keep it simple and use quantity of 1. Another thing to keep in mind here is the posting method. Here we have 2 choices, and each production order linked to a project needs to be part of those 2 options, either finished item or the consumed. We will use the consumed item method, which will basically result in a single transaction for a finished good item being present in our project. I will click on Create. And here I will quickly run through the steps to complete and end this production order, so there will be no scheduling and no enhanced functionality associated with it. So I will quickly estimate my production order. I will then start it. And here I'll show you that I have configured the system to basically create and post route card journal as well as the pick and list journal at the start of operation. Once that is posted, we're just going to go to the warehouse. We're going to go to the View tab, Click on All Journals just to make sure that we have 2 journals that are created and posted, which is what we have expected. And I would like to keep tabs on the realized cost of our production order. So here I navigate to Overview Costing, and here I see that I have a realized cost amount of $15. I'm going to close that. And we're going to go and report that order is finished, and then we're going to end it. So once we end the production order, if it was a standalone production order, we should have expected the seedling item to be available in our on-hand inventory. But because this production order was linked to a project, this item, as soon as it was manufactured, was actually consumed into the project. So to validate that, I will go to my release product list, find my seedling item right here, and I will click on on-hand inventory. You see there's no on-hand inventory, even though we just completed a production order for it. What had happened here is, if you look at the transactions, is we have 2 transactions that resulted in this operation. So the first one was a purchase against the production order right here, and the second one, which was generated at the same time, was a sale against the transaction associated with a project. So this item will never be available in our on-hand inventory because it will be immediately consumed in our project. All right, let's come back to our project. Another thing that had happened when we ended a production order is we also got a posted transaction inside of our project. So let's take a look at it. Here we see a posted transaction. We see that invoice status is chargeable. That means it will be included in our invoice proposal, but not yet because we have not run it. We also see the item seedling, which is the one we just finished. The seedling item was set up as the FIFO item, actual costed item. So the cost of the production order actually got into the cost of the associated project transaction. And we also see a sales price of $17. That $17 sales price came in from a base sales price that I have set up on the release product. One of the last requirements for this item is an ability to change sales price even though that transaction is already posted, but because it has not been invoiced, we should be able to edit that price. The first thing we will have to do in order for us to do that is navigate back to our release product, select the seedling, and change a base sales price over there. So I will scroll down to sale. Here's my $17, which is my current sales price, and let me just change it to $16 right here. Once I do that, I will close it. Now let's go back to our posted transaction. And now I will use an adjust transaction function here in the top left corner. I will have to select adjustment date, which will be a current date. Click on OK. Now I have to decide what exactly am I doing here. What I will do here is make sure that my sales price selection is set to yes. What that means is the system will go into the release product and grab the active price and update that price on my posted transaction. So I'm just going to keep it as yes right here. I'm going to click on OK. So here on the top, I see my original transaction, and I see that my sales price is set up as $17. And this is on the bottom here is my to-be transaction. And if I scroll to the right, I see that my new sales price is $16. So we have achieved what we have expected. And now in order to activate the change, we have to post that adjustment right here. Now we're going to close the screen. And if we refresh the screen right here, we'll see that we have a $15.99, which is basically a rounded up amount of $16. That is our new sales price. So we have fulfilled our requirement number 1. Let's go back to our project. Now let's take a look at our requirement number 2. So we have an item B. It's a higher level assembly. It should use item A. But first we need to understand, do we have an item A, which in our case is seedling, available for a consumption in item B production? Well, as we have seen previously, that item was produced and then sold into the project immediately. So we, at this point in time, we have 0 on-hand inventory of that item. This is why we have to do that technical step of bringing that seedling item back into our on-hand inventory. Well, there are multiple ways of doing that. Of course, we can use inventory adjustment journal. But what we can do in this case is we will generate an item journal from the project itself. Well, we're going to go into the journal, click on the item, generate a new journal right here. Click on lines and select our seedling item. And here it's slightly different than any inventory adjustment or movement journal, because here if we want to return that item back into our on-hand inventory, we have to add it back with a negative quantity, because if we keep it positive, it will then consume that item into our project. But we would like to do a reverse, therefore we have to change the sign to -1. Once we do that, we have to populate correct inventory location and warehouse dimensions. And then the main question is the cost and the sales price. This is a new transaction in our project. So first we have to decide, do we bring it back with a zero cost or an actual cost? Well, because we already sold that item to our franchisees and that item is just waiting to be invoiced, we don't want to bring that item back with any value. Therefore, the cost of that transaction should be zero. So we're going to make sure that it is indeed zero right here. The second question is, do we have to have any sales price on that transaction? Well, because this transaction will be generated as the part of the project, any return and the sales price on it will result in a credit to our customers, to our franchisees. Because we don't want to issue any credit for that sale, we also have to make sure that the sale price is also zero. So once we save this transaction, we can then go ahead and post it. So once we do that, two things had actually happened. If we go back to our posted transaction for our project, we see a return of the ceiling with a zero cost and a zero sales price. So there's no credit to our franchisees. And at the same time, we now have an inventory of a ceiling item that we can then consume in our production for the plant. Here it is. Go back here. And now we see that we have physical inventory and available physical 1 unit, which is exactly what we wanted. All right. So we have fulfilled that. We will be able to use item A when we're building item B, which in our case will be a plant. The second requirement we have to fulfill is that there should be no separate transaction for that item B on the franchisee statement. So this item B should not be sold separately to our franchisees. So how do we avoid that? If we were to create another production order for item B, then it would result in a separate transaction which will have a sales price in our project, as you have seen with an item A, but we want to avoid that. So that is where we have to go and take a closer look at the bill of materials associated with item B, which is a plant, and item C, which is a final assembly, and which is in our case is sellable packaged plant that we just produced. So let's take a look at the plant. So there's nothing special here. If we look at engineering bill of version, we see that this plant has 2 bill of material lines, one for the seedling, which we already have on hand because we returned it, and then some nutrient mix right here. And then if we look at the sellable item, which is basically a packaged plant, and take a look at the bill of material for it, we see that it has the plant and the packaging. So on the surface, they look identical. But if we take a closer look, for the first BOM line, which is a plant, we see that the line time is packed supply. So what that means is that there will be a hierarchy of production orders, and creation of a production order for a sellable good would trigger creation of production order for the plant itself. So there will be a parent-child relationship between a production order for sellable good and the plant. So let's try to test it. For this, I will go back to my project, and I will generate another production order. I will generate a production order for sellable item. So this is the item C, the item that will be sold to my franchisees. So I can create a production order for it. Again, keep it simple, just quantity of 1. Now we have a production order that ends with 546. Let me go back to a list of my production orders, refresh my screen, and here I see that order on the top. Well, now I will go through normal steps of updating that sales order. As soon as I do the estimate though, you will see that the system automatically created a second production order, 547, and you can see that it has a reference number which is referencing a parent production order for the sellable good. So this is a parent-child hierarchy that I was referring to. All right. So now let's just go ahead and end this production order for the plant, that child production order. So we'll go through the same sequence of steps. I will start my production order. When I do that, let me just take a look at the costs for this production order. I see that my realized cost is $12. Now I will go back and report it as finished. And then I will end this production order, a child production order for my plant. Well, we have ended this production order. What is the difference between ending the production order for plant and ending production order for seedling? Well, seedling production order was a parent production order and the plant production order was a child production order. So what does it mean? If we go back to our project and take a look at posted transactions here, we see that there is no transaction for a plant, even though the production order for it has already been ended. The reason why is because that is a child production order. And only after we end a parent production order, which will be for a sellable good, only then we will see a single transaction for that item in our project. All right, so let's go back to the list of all production order and let's complete that sellable good product. So I'm going to start it. It's going to generate my picking list journal and my route journal. Now let's take a look at the costs of that production order. We see that we have realized cost of $24. Let's just remember that number. And now let's just go, the report is finished. And ending it. Now let's go back to our posted transaction for our project. Refresh the screen. And now we see a transaction for a sellable item. First thing we're not going to notice is the cost, which is $24, which was actual cost of the production of the plant plus the production of the sellable good, which is what we wanted to have. That was one of the requirements. And now we see a sales price of $90. Well, let's go back to the list of our requirements. And here we see that the cost of goods manufactured are marked up to determine a sales price invoiced to franchisees, right? So we're going to use as cost, which is the $24, and mark it up to come up with a sales price. Let's go back to our system, and we see that $90 sales price doesn't really look as a markup of $24, and that it's not. This sales price is actually a base sales price from a sellable good item, and now it needs to be modified. So we're going to use adjust transaction function again, same date. But now instead of just saying sales price yes, which just grabbed a new price from the released product, we're going to use a markup percentage option. And here we can specify how we are marking up the cost. And in this case, I will just mark it up by 10%. So we have a $24 cost, 10% of it will be $240. So the resulting cost should be 24 plus $240, which would be $26.40. So that's an expectation. Let me just click on OK. And now let's take a look at the cost right here. Sorry, the sales price right here, $90. And then let's take a look at the sales price for the new transaction. We see that it's 10% higher, $26.40. And now for us to activate that adjustment, we're going to click on Post and go back to our original transaction right here. And now we see we have a new sales price that is based on the markup percentage of the cost, which was the requirement number 3 for item C, sellable item. So now we have to check again, do we have an inventory of that item? So let's just check that. We're going to go back to our list of all products, click on Manage Inventory, on Hand Inventory, and we have the same result here. Even though we just made a sellable item using a production order, it was consumed into the project right away. So that's why we have 0 on hand inventory, right? But remember, this item has to be sold to our end customer, and the franchisee should get a credit for it. So that is when we're going to go through the basically same steps of generating an item journal to return that sellable item back into our inventory. So I will click on my project, item journal, generate another journal right here. Click on New to generate a new journal. Click on Lines. Now we'll say sellable product. It will be returned, therefore it's going to be -1. And the cost of that return should be 0 as well, because we already have a transaction for which we're going to charge our franchisees for. We're just returning that item with a 0 cost so we can then sell it to our end customer, so the cost will be 0. And now if we look at our requirement right here for this item right here, we see that the franchisees should be credited for the sale of item C to an end customer, where the credit amount should be sales price to an end user minus franchise fees, right? But we don't have a sales order to an end user, so let's create one first. So I will leave that journal as is for now, and I will go and create a sales order to our end customer. So I'm going to create a normal sales order. Click on New, select a customer, warehouse 22. And now let's say we got a sales order from our customer. He wants that item, sellable item. He wants one of it. And we negotiated sales price of, let's say, $120 for it, right? So that's our negotiated price for sale of that made item to our customer. So now we have a sales price to an end user, $120. So for now, we cannot really post a packing slip because we have zero in-hand inventory of that sellable item on hand, right? So we're going to leave that order as is here. We're going to come back to our journal right here. And now we have to do some math and basically decide what should be the credit amount for that will be issued to franchisees. Well, let's go back to the project tab right here. So we're going to return it back with a zero cost, which is what we expected. And our sales price would have to be manually entered here. Unfortunately, I did not come up with an easy way of using a sales price to an end customer minus franchise fees, but we have to do it manually. So what will happen here is we remember that sales price was $120 and our franchise fee is 10%, so $12. So 120 minus 12, that should be a credit to our franchisees in an amount of $108. So now let's just check that every field is populated. It is. Let's just save that and let's post it. So when we look at our posted transaction for this project, we now should see 4 transactions. And here is the transaction that we just generated. We see a sales amount of $108, and then we see a zero cost for that return. So now we are set to continue with a sales order to our end users. So now we should be able to go and post a packing slip for it. Let's just do that. Because we have an inventory on hand, it was returned, so we should be able to post a packing slip for that sales order for end customer. All right, and now if you remember, we have a sales price, so our accounts receivable should be $120, but this item was returned into our inventory at zero cost, so the cost of goods sold is going to be $0. And now I can go and invoice it. All right, so now we fulfill an order to our end customer, and now let's go back to our transactions right here, and now let's pretend this is an end of the month, and now we need to generate a statement to our franchisees. So that statement will include all the transactions that are included in our invoice proposal. So let's run an invoice proposal. Click on invoice proposal in top left corner, and let's take a look, select all the lines, and let's take a look at this line. So the first line was for the sale of a ceiling item, and we remember the original sales price was $17, but we have modified it to $16. So this is what we see right here. The second transaction is for a return of that ceiling item back into our on-hand inventory. That transaction has zero cost and zero sales price because we're not going to issue a credit for that return. The second transaction is for a sale of a sellable item to our franchisees. Remember that the sales price was determined as a markup of 10% of our manufacturing cost, which was $24. And we see a sales price of $26.40. And the second transaction was for a return of the sellable good, so we can then sell it to our end customer. And the sales price here was determined as the sales price to our end customer, which was $120, minus franchise fee of 10% minus $12, and that is what we have, $108. And you can see right here that the invoice amount is actually negative. So we're issuing a credit $61. So we're issuing a credit of $65.61 to our franchisees. So that's a whole goal. This is a credit that will now have to be equally shared and split across all our franchisees. So we see the total amount, it's $65.61. And now we're going to click on OK. And usually, depending on how your contract is set up, you should expect to see one invoice proposal here. But now we see 3 here. And that is when we have to go and review how that project contract was actually configured. So I'm back into my project. I'm going to click on the project contract, the one was set up. And what we see here is we have 3 funding sources. So we have all of those are the customers, which represent a franchisee. We have franchisee customer 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, so that's why we have 3 invoice proposals, 1 for each funding source. And the funding rules are actually stating that each franchisee should be allocated and distributed an equal amount. So in this case, it's 33.33%. So that is why, again, we see 3 invoice proposals. And now we just have to review those invoice proposals just to make sure that they indeed make sense to us. So let's go back to our project, click on Project Invoice Proposals. And remember that we had a total of 6461, right? So now, if we look at our invoice proposal, we see that amounts are equal 2187, and that's negative. That means it's a credit. So that means each franchisee will have an equal share of this credit, 2187, which was a third of the total credit amount that was generated by all the transactions that we have posted to that project. And if we would like to look into more details, we can click on one of those proposals, and we can see that we have an equal share of all the expenses. In this case, an equal share of that $16 that has to be split, which was the cost of sale of the seedling, and also equal share of the for the making of the sellable good, which was $880 times 3, and then an equal share of $36 for the credit that was issued, $108 for the sale of that sellable item. So let's just go back to our presentation and let's just do a quick summary. So we have fulfilled the first requirement by creating a standalone production order that was linked to a project, and we were able to use an adjust transaction function to modify our sales price before it was invoiced. For the requirement number 2, we had to utilize the pack supply BOM line type. So we have created 2 production order, a child production order for item B, and therefore an ending that production order did not result in a separate sale of item B for our project. For item number 3, we had a parent production order, and we had to use a markup percentage to actually come up with a sales price that is based on the costs. And the cost, of course, included the cost of the item B. Now, for the sale of the sellable item to our end customer, we had to return that sellable item back. And when we did return that, we, of course, make sure that the franchisees got a credit based on the sales price minus franchise fee. And if we look at the last requirement slide here, we have a statements which would include all those invoices that we generate once a month. Franchisees will be charged for item A and C, as we have seen. Franchisees got a credit for the sale of item C. We have seen that as well. That credit was sales price minus the franchise fee. And we also have seen that based on the project contract, we were able to equally allocate all the expenses and all the revenues to all participating franchisees. So I hope you enjoyed that video, and until the next time.